so deep, and as certainly Rumi's poetry is deep to say the least, but as it is channeled, so I'm really going to choose that term, channeled through your gift, it takes on a whole new resonance field as you were just speaking of. And the lyric that spoke to me is the lover's soul keeps smiling.
Yeah.
And what that reminds me of on a couple of levels is the nature of love from the methodology that we talk of love. When I say methodology, meaning in metaphysics of love, as Ernest he defines it as the self-givingness of spirit whose desire is to create more of itself out of itself, and the only way it can do that is through you and through me, right?
Yeah.
So it's that essence, right? But it's also then understanding when Rumi says that it's smiling is that it is the as it's ruminating and emanating the light that its nature, it is the light at the same time, right? So
Yes.
and then we are that.
Yes.
And then the next layer of that that speaks to me, and specifically as you sing it, is the depth of the eros human love, right? Which I know you've shared in your life with Etika,
Yeah.
and how that layers on the evolution of how the individual grows. I'm going to pass it to you and just let you take off.
Well, thank you for that summarization there. There are these another saying of Rumi, since we're on this, and you're talking about the simultaneous nature of experience. Like when one is awakened, she'll awaken it with her own light. I like you're like bringing in the light, and you said it earlier. It's not on the outside; it's with from within and without.
Right.
If there's this vibrational shift that happens when we are in divine alignment, experiencing the simultaneous nature of the infinite as it's experiencing itself, as us, through us, all of that. And then we ride on this line of the space between worlds.
Mm-hmm.
You hear me talk about this a lot. It's like it's a vibrational dimension where atonement, like at oncement, is happening. We're not here or there. We're all of it at once. And the way Rumi would say that would be when he says, out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's an open field. I'll meet you there. And when the soul lies down upon that grass, words like you and I stop making any sense. So he means like out beyond the ideas that are already here, like bringing it into Ernest Holmes' zone. Like when we're manifesting things that we know we need materially that are already here, I kind of call it like secondhand source. It's
Right.
stuff that's already here, but it's necessary because we are humans, so we need
Right.
to have physical material comforts so that we can ascend, into the other dimensions. But when you get out to the ideas, out to the field beyond what's already there, it takes courage to, like when St. Paul would say, I die daily, to let go of who you think you are, to become more of what you really are. That's that essence you talked about, where you're gone. Like
Right.
Ruby talks about annihilation all the time too for that.
Yeah, and it can be really confusing in the sense that two pieces to that. One is that what we're speaking of is living the life of a mystic, really.
Yeah.
Where it's that living that life of a mystic of oneness, but not where people get confused about that is they think that that's then living in the life of oneness while denying the other facets of life. And it's not. It's about living in a state of oneness while understanding, aligning with, and incorporating the other dimensions that exist. And then using those as if you were to funnel those all together into your heart and soul, and as if your heart and soul is the fertile ground, right, for then it to be expressed back out, right? And I like to use that analogy, even though I just thought it up on the spot, was
I love
because
it.
what that what that then takes away for me personally is then it takes away the mechanics of it. I think that in 20th century metaphysics we were so taught about the mechanics, so you would think, okay, so there's a God. I am that God. If I think the right thoughts and I'm going to hand it over to the law is going to turn into this Willy Wonka chocolate factory conveyor belt, right? And then
Yeah.
out's going to come this glorious piece of chocolate if I did the right thinking, right? So then there's always that condition on it. Whereas opposed to, I don't know if you scream into the microphone, but as opposed
Yeah,
to
yeah, it's good.
what we're speaking of is the fluidity of
Yeah.
all of that. So the fluidity of creation isn't separate, it's part of it is life itself, and then we get to experience it to the degree that we understand it, which is an ever evolving
Yeah.
journey.
I would add to that, we get to experience it to the degree that we allow it.
Right.
Because, like what Rumi would say, is to get rid of understanding and like embrace bewilderment. Like it's in that not knowing zone where I know this to be so. I don't know anything to be so, and therefore I get more opportunity to grow. But there's that balance, which you're talking about. Like I know um, I am in a physical form, and right, to deny any part would be like if you have a tree and somebody cuts the top of it off, and all you have is the trunk and the roots. Well, if we lived only by the physical manifestation of ourselves as the thing that sucks energy from the ground, and there's nothing to bring it to.
Hmm.
So we need the trunk, we need the branches, and we need the leaves, And the interesting thing is to have that courage to step into the unknown. Like I was just starting to contemplate this the other day more fully. Like it's interesting to me that nature gives us this example of being completely naked in winter. When it's the coldest, it's the most bitter, and it's completely exposed, embracing the I can take it kind of thing.
Right.
Next thing you know, it's got leaves and beauty when it's nice out. Like, what? You know, it's this paradox of life. So to get to your point, what you said so beautifully, to overemphasize one side or the other, the spiritual or the body, is to not be able to have that full, like a rainbow, if it were a spectrum of colors, or
Hmm.
the vibration of the ohm in sound. It's to be able to allow our thoughts to disappear every day and wake up the next morning and allow for what is yours to do that day in tandem and in relationship with infinite source.
Yeah, the term that I like to remind myself of that journey you speak of is one that our beloved brother David Leonard has done workshops on over the years, which is the dance with the beloved, right?
Yeah.
And so if we just, for me, if I look at this journey as a dance with the beloved, and I've spoken on this many times, is that it's the dance of weaving from our humanity into our divinity as our divinity weaves into our humanity. Right?
Yeah.
Now, granted, that sounds like the ultimate esoteric experience, but yet that if we choose that as the objective, which will require having courage and releasing our attachment to how things are supposed to look at, then that gives us space, if you will, to evolve into a higher vibrational frequency, right? And then if we and then using that analogy, understanding in metaphysics, we're always attracting the very thing we're emitting, right? So if we're evolving, then we're continuing to bring into our world that which is reflecting what we're giving to the world, meaning our untethered self,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
then that helps us move into, if using David Hawkins' work, spiraling into a higher framework of consciousness. Now, using Hawkins as a template on that, when he references those that vibrate at what one would consider the highest form of consciousness, enlightenment, awareness, awakening, whatever, those individuals, based on his work, live in a world that really isn't in the world.
It's
Right?
not.
So as
Yeah.
long as we're going to navigate in this physical world, we've got to find a way to do that balancing, because we do need to manifest, demonstrate, use physical form to help us sustain the physical nature of life while we still evolve.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's beautifully said. And I'll just add to that, it's to become, um, I like to say, to become porous in nature,
I love it.
to recognize we are light. This is not even real. It
Uh-huh.
is and it isn't. And to be in the world, Paramahansa Yogananda would say, to be in the world and not of it, to
Right.
remember that we're in the world and not of it. And the only way we can have this experience as a soul is in a human body.
Right.
So to not overemphasize, again, like to not be a slave to habits that will keep us one dimensional and allow ourselves to flourish. But there's this way that the more light we can hold, the less shadow we emit. So in other words, like to be able to
Say that
see,
again because I think that's important for us all to hear that.
yeah, the more light we can hold, the less shadow we emit.
Brilliant.
It's because, and it comes from the inside, pulling in that energy and allowing yourself, like when we do breathing exercises, to really feel, a beautiful yoga practitioner would teach us to feel that space between the cells and then the space in the cells. And
Mm,
David Hawkins would also say, as quantum physicists would say, we're mostly space.
right.
So these ideas we hold, if we can keep them at a super high vibration, we can get to that spiral dynamic level of supreme awareness of all that is. And I was just talking about this morning. We don't have to give up our eyes of reason on the world, but we also open the all-seeing eye, the one that sees how it all goes together.
Right.
And then we start to have compassion for self, other, judgment drops, and we move through events and experiences without picking any vibration up that's not ours, but transforming the experience for everyone just from walking into the space.
Beautifully put, and also a really great segue because I want us to talk about to move beyond the, and I don't want to call it just ethereal, but the first part of our conversation here is very ethereal, but also really relevant and important and applicable. But as we move into navigating the everyday aspects of life, because the week that we have before us relative to our country
Yeah.
is certainly monumental, as was the last 2 weeks. So I'm going to bounce a quote off you.
Okay.
And let's use that as a stimulus to move forward in the context of how do we navigate what's in front of us. It is from Eckhart Tolle, and it's this: the secret to finding the deeper level in the other is finding the deeper level in yourself. Without finding it in yourself, you cannot see it in the other.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Like so how do we do that? It's this distillation process of thoughts. Like meditation is such a it's so difficult to start a meditation practice because everything of our senses wants to pull us out. And
Uh-huh.
we actually do believe at that point that other is out there, which is why Eckhart Tolle suggests you have to start with within so you know how to see. It improves our seeing. And in improving our seeing, it improves our being, I like to say.
I
Because,
love that.
yeah, it just does. There's this way to that without meditation, or it's just, when we meditate, we close both of these eyes to
Right.
stop the ideas from coming in of the things that are already here that we can use and reuse. And I like people who repurpose things, recycle things. But we keep mixing with the same kinds of energies and just turning them into something else. So when we look inside and we start to grow from the inside, that light, and it allow ourselves to become a pillar of light, and then it emanates from outside of us, right? We can start recognizing when we open our eyes again, we've just been seeing through the single eye of, realization.
Hmm.
If we know, which we do, an out picturing of something, if we're going to project anything onto somebody, we could just project love as we move into this week. Project from your eyes. Like I like to play this game where everything I look at, I light it up. And I light up everything in between the thing I'm seeing that I can't see because there are all those little neutrinos and quarks and there are all these little particles of light between us that we don't see. So knowing that, we can direct them as we will. So I always say, like, guide my reason, will, and activity. Like tune into the
I love it.
infinite. And when I'm looking, I'm just trying to direct love and light. But it's not like love and light. I mean, with the source that comes through me.
Correct. So that's also a perfect segue of guidance in that yesterday evening, this short documentary on the life of Louise Hay
Oh,
that David Alt
Yeah.
is not only in but narrates, and it's so deeply touching. And I mean, we all know the name Louise Hay, right? And I think for many of, I'll speak for myself, I had really forgotten the roots of where she came from, but the roots to her becoming known in the world was doing workshops called hay rides with gay men who were dying of AIDS in the 80s. And it was very controversial work at the time because it was um, a very intense approach to metaphysics. And so
Yeah.
she was, and as typical 20th century metaphysics, was like, you play a role in creating this in your life, so let's figure out how to fix it, right? Which is obviously a little harsh. As we've evolved, we understand what that means. We can hold the container of that while also understanding the healing. But what she did, which was so fascinating and certainly lines up with what you're talking about, was she said it, for any of that healing to take place, any of the healing to take place, the love has to begin by seeing it within. And so
Mm.
she would hold a mirror up, have everyone hold a mirror up to their face, right? And I flash back on many of workshops I've done with that, certainly with teenagers and many others. But there's such power in that very simple step of holding a mirror up to your face and telling yourself that you love yourself, right? And doing it until there is a resonance field from deep within that lines up with that. So it moves beyond um, the thought, the intellect, to
Yeah.
the visceral, right?
Yeah.
And so when you're speaking of doing that, of emitting love particles of light, the way to begin that, I would think, would be with the self, so that it's anchored, right? So that
Yeah.
you have the compassion to move forward with
Yeah.
it, right?
If it doesn't come from within, you're going to run out.
Right.
It's not going to come from without. That's the drain when people really believe that it's them, and that's where that process of allowing, allowing it to come in, and then directing it. What we would do in our performances, what I still do, is like walking into a room, and before it becomes one audience, it's 1,000 people come in.
Right.
These little shards of, the spark of the infinite. But as soon as we start to sing, our whole, if we had any intention at all other than just tuning in and listening, it was to create one audience from the many, the one. And before you know it, you have an audience. Like very soon, if we're doing what we're doing as ministers of music, right? Um, and it's the same anywhere. Just to, it's a respectful thing, but it's allowing it to come through and not giving from within, but allowing from within. So we always were creating circles.
It's the prayer that I did for us this morning in our rehearsal.
Yes, exactly.
It's
Yeah,
it's it's lining up, trusting the light that you have, giving of that unconditionally,
yeah,
right? Trusting that that then will serve humanity, not from an ego perspective of just being the channel of the light, and then understanding that it's a cyclical process. So as it goes out, it's going to come back, and then to give it back out.
and it
So,
comes this way, and it comes this way too. Like that symbol of the cross. Like so, it comes in through our crown chakra or from wherever. I mean, we have pores on our skin.
uh-huh.
That's where the light comes in and out. I mean, it's we're not supposed to hold it all. We're breathing. Like everything about us wants to share and participate. David Leonard and I. I'm glad you brought up David. We're teaching a class right now on modern day mystics. It's what the mystics know, and it's so fun. As you know, you've known him for a long time too. Just
I've known him
oh,
for
he's amazing.
30 years,
Yeah.
probably close to that, yeah.
Yeah. And so that dance with the beloved is, yeah, that's as within, so without. I also like to use the infinity symbol.
Uh-huh.
Like we are the going back to Sufism, the word dervish, like the whirling dervishes, is a Turkish word that means threshold,
Right.
and they recognize that the body is the threshold between worlds. So we're always in
Right.
this thing.
And most people don't understand the reason that the twirling dervishes twirl is to transcend their mental, right? It's to create a space of opening up for the light to come in, if you will, right? It's
Yeah.
trying to release the mental control and just become one with the energy of the energy of life. Is my understanding of that.
Yeah, part of that was that's what Rumi was doing when he would get into ecstatic trances where he would begin to whirl. The source made him do it. He couldn't not.
Right.
And then to replicate that, as ritual often is, the dervish started to do it. But the interesting about the dervishes is like they they spin counterclockwise
Correct.
in a counterclockwise circle, which is opposite the energy of materialization
Right.
on the earth. So they're, and a whole bunch of other things at the same time. But it's kind of just kind of like finding that balance to keep them on that midpoint between worlds.
Right.
One hand is catching the infinite, and the other one is bringing it down.
So, speaking of ritual, and you spoke of meditation a while ago, I personally have committed to a greater meditation practice during these transformative times on our planet.
Yeah.
And I found, as I used in some counseling sessions this week, this wonderful GIF, and I don't think if I can show it to, if I can get it on the screen, I don't know if you guys can see it. Um, but it's this dude who's standing up in the streets like this that says, with great bravado, 8 minutes of meditation a day gives me the focus I need to conquer the world. And this, what appears to be homeless, semi Buddhist guy sitting on the ground looks up and says to him, dude, an hour a day and you wouldn't need to. So,
That's great.
right. So I think that what that speaks to for me, and the reason I wanted us to talk about this morning is that um, to remind all of us that as we navigate what's unfolding in our world, to remember that meditation, the practices that we have to anchor and center ourselves, how important they are.
Yeah.
And really to invite and encourage everyone to expand that right now, to not um, make a commitment to not live at the effect of what's going on externally. You have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I love that, first of all. Did you make that up, that
I
cartoon?
didn't know I found it in
It
my
sounds like something
hours
you
of.
would do. But yeah, meditation. So I've had a dedicated meditation practice now for over 30 some years. And the thing that helped me, all of these things that we're talking about, it helps us get the realization of and the experience of like self-love because it slows everything down. It's really funny. I can't watch commercials anymore. Like if I'm
Uh-huh.
watching something, it's such an interruption and the pace is so jarring. Social media is so jarring. Um, but what it does, it just keeps our fight or flight, our cortisol levels up. And the news is designed to keep conflict.
Yeah.
And if you can keep conflict in the air, then they have us because you just need more. It's like an addiction. What meditation does is turn all of that off, so that kind of like eating a French. I always bring it back to food, Keith.
Were you going to say
It,
your French fry?
no, like a French pastry
Oh,
over a
okay.
French, like a French. You know how they're just not as sweet
Right,
as like a Hostess cupcake or a Hostess ho ho or something. A little. All of a sudden, you become more perceptive of the subtle vibrations of things.
right.
And that's when that spiraling thing can happen because we're not so anchored in the body and taking the shots of that. You can open up, like you were talking about that image of Erika. You can open, and as Yogananda says, you can stand unshaken amidst the crash of breaking worlds. Nothing can knock you from your root. We'll be so centered in meditation. I call it like the Weeble people consciousness. You might wobble, but you won't fall down.
Oh, I love that.
You just stay in the middle there.
So on that note, the next quote I have for us is from
About a Weeble people? What is it?
the great Alan Alda, and it
Oh, yeah.
says,
Sorry.
"You have to leave the city of your comfort and go into the wilderness of your intuition. What you'll discover will be wonderful. What you'll discover is yourself."
Where to start with that one? Uh, yeah, because all of a sudden you'll have to pull forth from within you that which you need to make it in a new things you didn't even know you had in there. That's when you really start unpacking the bag,
Right.
so to speak, and attracting to yourself what wasn't already pre-described. You become who you are. I mean, before I moved from Pittsburgh, I already had challenges with my family's fine, but they just didn't get where I was coming from most
Uh-huh.
often. But I was strong-willed enough to hold on to myself, so I didn't lose myself and find myself again. Um, but that's it. When you move to another city, it's if you want to see how your consciousness is, see what you attract, see how easy or how hard, and then get busy.
Mhm. The thing I love about this quote is the wilderness of your intuition, right? So we've all had experiences with our intuition over life. And the thing for each of us to remember, as I remind myself of that, is that no matter where I go beyond my comfort zone, my intuition goes with me,
Yeah.
right? And so the key to all of us in regards to our intuition is listening to it, right? Being tuned in so that when it shows up, it'll guide us to those next things. You
Yeah.
know, it'll
And,
guide us to
and
that
that
so
is,
that we can then live a life that is reflecting our spiritual magnificence, really.
if that's where you are, like some people think they're following their intuition, but it's just their thoughts.
Uh huh.
You know, it's not their intuition at all. It's not wisdom guided will. It's not from the soul. It's from the, well, I've done this before, so I'll do this again.
Yeah.
You know, or you quit one job and you just, sometimes it's the fallback to just go start to try to do the same thing. In our intuition might say, nope, that's not the way. But that could, so allowing for that growth, you know, would be the,
And that can only come when you fine tuned your connection
through
through meditation.
meditation.
Yeah,
You really
exactly.
hear intuition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the next quote is from the print's so small on this one. Well, let's just say the perfect person. Um, so it's the quote is when your energy, because I think it leads us to this, when your energy vibrates at a frequency that is within direct alignment to what the universe has been attempting to deliver your entire life, you begin to live in the flow and true miracles start to happen.
Yeah. It's like everything's a miracle or it isn't, right?
Right.
They say. Yeah, so again, it's becoming this place where your movement doesn't make a wave.
Uh-huh.
Then you're being divinely guided. Like when our vibration is high enough, and what I don't mean is you don't make waves with people who don't get what it is we're trying to bring. That's been in every time, you know, in history. Some people are going to get it. Some seed fell on the rocky ground. Some seed fell on the road.
Uh-huh.
Some yielded a hundredfold. Listen, then those who have ears. But for us, it's not even that. We have known. If you move through without intention or like pushing a vision, we can be more receptive to the highest form of consciousness we can have is to use our mind to get out of our mind and stay always in the one mind, not just here and there. And that's kind of what that quote means. It's like when we're constantly like a perfectly tuned fork, the
Uh-huh.
pitch of resonance, uh, which transcends all that we can see and all that we can hear, and it's this subtle place where we can move without motion.
Right.
We can see without looking. We can hear without listening. And we can direct things at will. We could sit on a mat and do it from wherever we are. People call that remote healing or remote anything. But there's a way to send it out without motion. And it's a high science, but meditation is the airplane route to that one.
Well, and the thing to remember for our viewers and listeners and community is that it you begin it right where you are.
Yep.
Right. So it's the next step. You know, it's the next step on the journey of spiritual awakening, which provides for a space for personal self-empowerment. Right? Personal self-empowerment doesn't mean you have the strength to control the world. It means that you're so grounded and founded in your divine nature that you know how to then navigate what is called both good and bad and worldly effects. Right? That comes from being spiritually awakened. That's not meaning that you're better than anyone else. It's just your fine tuning is at a different place, right?
Yeah, like an instrument or anything else. Uh,
Exactly. So as we move into the week ahead, which we know are going to have some substantial effects in the physical world, we just know that with the inauguration coming down, with all of the troops that are on the ground in our nation's capital, with the conversations that are taking place, that there's the possibility for greater violence. It's we are called to live from that high-minded perspective while also not being blind to what's going on, right? We have wisdom within us, and so we have the capacity to go through that while also healing from the effects leading up to this day. So I think it's important for us to remember it's not an or situation. It's all and, right?
Yeah.
That we have the ability to open the door to the next step of our journey. Yogananda, who you referenced earlier, says, "Today I will open the door of my calmness and let the footsteps of silence gently enter the temple of my activities."
That's it.
I'm going to read that again and then let's you and I talk about that. "Today I will open the door of my calmness and let the footsteps of silence gently enter the temple of my activities."
That's it. I mean, that's at a cellular level there. Like
Yeah.
when you the footsteps of my silence.
Yeah.
Um, that's what I mean. Like you don't make you're barely noticed. It's kind of like light. It's always there. And like if you strike a match in a dark room, it looks pretty lit. That match looks very powerful. But if you strike a match in a room that's already lit, how much, the question becomes, how much more light can we bring to the situation?
Right.
How much more luminous can I make myself? And when we make sound, like the silence is how we can develop the light.
Right.
Because just when we talk, we disturb the light with sound vibrations. It gets shifted and altered. Um, but it's in that silence that we can work on charging our body with light force. I mean, there's life force, but it's
Yeah.
the force of which nothing can withstand. It's like the power of love,
Yeah.
and bringing that into this week. If you look at what the number of the millions of people, or it ends up being tens of thousands who um, went to the Capitol last week.
Uh-huh.
If people can get that excited about doing those kinds of things, like their reptilian brains are just tripped, their cortisol levels are up. It's very hard to rationalize or take a pause and get centered. Not saying they weren't focused, but it's like the difference is we can bring the same kind of attention to another side of it and help balance it just by getting on your meditation mat. We can
Right.
balance and help to calm down. It's one of those other quotes, like calm it down a little bit, let it cool off. We bring a coolness to the heat when we meditate. You don't have to do
Exactly.
anything else but that.
So the reason I wanted to close with that quote today is because I want to remind each of us, including myself, that we do have within us this calmness. It's inherent within us. We now know the tools of how to access that, whether that's 5 minutes, 3 minutes, or an hour a day through meditation, through just simply listening or the silence. And then to take that silence into the temple of our activities. And that doesn't mean when you go to the grocery store specifically, or when you're taking out the trash. It means every activity, whether it's sitting down, or laying down to go to sleep, or cooking food, or talking to your pet, or even if you have the activity of processing your frustrations. Use the intentions to let that temple of silence, the gentleness of the silence, be present
Yeah.
in those activities.
Yeah. You're gonna
Um,
in the temple of silence, in the temple of peace, I will meet thee, I will touch thee, I will love thee, and coax thee into my altar of bliss. And another way to say this is like practice the presence.
yeah,
Like if you're going for a walk, just say, God and I are walking, or whatever you call source. Yeah, take it into everything and watch how that intuition Alan Alda was talking about shifts. You'll start to hear
yeah.
differently when you invite it in. What I like to
So,
think about meditation, I know we got to go, right? Is
yeah,
just one thing. Like I always say, in meditation, we sit and we think we're waiting on the infinite. But what if the infinite has been sitting on the other side, waiting for us for decades?
well, I like to look at that, and when I'm in meditation, I'm not waiting for the infinite to show up. The infinite sits there in my solar plexus,
Yeah.
as if it is my intuition, and I'm sitting there so that every other aspect of me can get the hell out of the way because it's
Yeah,
already
it's the
there.
same
Like,
thing. It's
the
like,
fat little baby Buddha is already in my belly, baby. So it's there. So I got to get
yeah,
everything else out so I'm aware of it.
yeah. It's not that it's there or here. It's just it's waiting to be greeted. Like the Quran would say, like for every step you take toward the infinite, it takes 1,000 toward you running.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. So it's
Beautiful.
just like
Well,
making
I've
the.
loved playing with you like this in this realm.
Me too.
Um,
It was just
so
fun.
much so, and thank you for that. And